Hi everyone, my name is Marissa Evangelista. I'm an MFA intern and I will be your moderator for tonight's Wil Talk with Artists. Our digital discussion tonight is with Paint Annapolis juried artist Beth-Ann Wilson. Beth-Ann is a teacher, gallery owner, artist, and more. Her portrait work depicts women in a strong pose who are surrounded by and interacting with elements that combine modern imagery and academic approaches to painting. These paintings feature vibrant colors and lively brushwork. Beth-Ann also grew to love the intimacy of plein-air painting, especially finding beauty in the mundane and depicting the ordinary as extraordinary. Additionally, I'd like to introduce the host of our show, Wil Scott, was an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs in the National Gallery of Art. He is uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between artists and the public. We will be starting this discussion with how Beth-Ann became interested in the arts.
My dad passed away.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it was really hard. It was really hard dealing with that. And one of my teachers at the time suggested to my mom some private art lessons. She's like, Beth seems to really, kind of rely on painting as a way to get through, this difficult time. Maybe that needs to be something encouraged in her. I ended up taking classes. I'm from Long Island, so I went to the Huntington School for Fine Arts and, taken a deep dive into sculpture and life drawing and oil painting in particular. And as part of the curriculum there, they had college prep portfolio days.
Oh, okay.
And I'm telling you, I probably could not have found Maryland on a map at the time. But one of the admissions counselors from Maryland Institute came over to where I had my paintings and my drawings set up, and she was like, you should really think about applying to MICA. And I was like, okay. I kind of didn't really know. I thought that I was going to stay in New York. I really wanted to go to NYU. But long story short, applied to MICA and got a scholarship, in fact.
Great.
And that's how I ended up down in Baltimore. And I loved it, and kind of came full circle with now teaching a continuing education class at MICA.
That's all really interesting because it sounds like it was not something, certainly until that day, that you had it focused on as a career. So let me ask you this: when the way that you came to go to those early art classes, it sounds like art as therapy, but
Yes.
but whether that's what anybody thought it was, including yourself, it sounds like from the way you talked about the experience, it was something that was cathartic and very powerfully expressive of you and what was, the emotions and the thoughts that you were having at the time.
Exactly.
So my question is that still true of your art?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, so the kind of most recent comparison or thing to, kind of think about is, we all just went through this really as a society, this really traumatic event through COVID quarantine.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, had to kind of work to find some sort of something to rely on to be able to get them through this really tough time, because it was very traumatic, and we did experience collectively a lot of grief, so I kind of use that as an analogy, and because I definitely found myself retreating to that again as well. But, for other people that have not suffered a similar sort of loss, they might not understand that that's kind of
Yeah. Would you say that any of the work that I saw looking at your website or anything that we're going to look at today is a direct result of your experience of that tumultuous time? Or
I did a series. It's on my website, and I think that I'm trying to remember what the exact headline is, but it was a series of florals.
Yeah.
And I used flowers during during quarantine as kind of a metaphor of rebirth and blossoming.
Yeah.
So that was the first exhibit that I had at my gallery, at Night Owl Gallery, when we were able to reopen again. And it was really important for me to kind of have, this kind of like message of hope that for me translated into these very bright and vibrant floral paintings. And in fact, I filled the gallery also with live flowers.
Yeah.
And
Well, that sounds really cool, but it also sounds like a great segue into actually looking at your very dynamic paintings.
Oh.
So let's have the first image, Marissa. If and Beth-Ann, if we talk too long about any one thing, Marissa will just move it ahead.
Okay. Yes, please do.
She actually has a good sense for the time and the rhythm of the talks. Okay, what you just said, and seeing 2021 and 4 roses and a young woman. I mean, there are so many ways as an art historian or a critic, I could sort of yammer on about this, but you obviously are painting not just for the physical act of painting or the enjoyment of color or the viscosity of your paints. I mean, there's something meaningful. Is this fair for me to say? Every image you present to us, there's something meaningful about it.
Usually, and whether the meaning was intentional or something that was more intuitive. This piece, speaking of the flowers, this was definitely like a much more like composed piece. So for these types of paintings, I'll work them in Photoshop and layer different photo references over one another to create the image. And this, speaking of like, tumultuous times, this was around the time that the Black Lives Matter movement was just, was really kind of coming to a head. And it was something that, I wanted to, kind of capture some of the feelings that I was having around some of the really, kind of complicated things that were happening in the world at the time, and frankly are, still happening in the world at the time, so depicted here obviously is a strong Black woman, and I have her surrounded by flowers that are these like, kind of like offerings. And the Nag Champa, of course, is incense, and it's, representational of an offering as well. And of course, the kind of urban graffiti and sticker culture backgrounds that I love to, paint in my work. So this is a pretty typical, kind of like all over composition where I play with the picture plane and experiment with different types of media. So I work with acrylic, oil. This one, it's hard to tell from the photo, but it also has some silver leaf in it as well. And fluorescent paint also that's blacklight reactive.
Are there any collage elements, real stickers or anything like that?
No, this is all painted. So they're paintings of stickers. So they're kind of paintings of collages.
Yeah. Now, the art historian in me, I couldn't help but notice the fingers in the lower right holding one long stem rose.
Yes.
To an old guy my age, that one single rose held like that is part of courtship, seduction. To me, I can't make the connection in my head between that gesture and that single flower with this very strong young woman looking out. Why did you put that there? Did you do it intentionally? Does it have some intentional reference?
I guess that my intention was less of a courtship and a type of seduction, but more of like an offering, more of like a friendship type offering.
But I can't help but pick at this because I see the bird and a couple of other pop culture things that are pretty recognizable. Do you put them in with any specific intention, or is it the color? Is it the, because this is in a real good sense behind some statement that is so clearly intentional and forceful. It's kind of a mishmash. And I don't mean that pejoratively. It's just a collection of all of these different things.
Right. Yeah. And no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, part of it is just kind of like found visual objects. And sometimes it's simply that I kind of just like the colors and I like the compositions of these of some of these stickers. I love like sticker culture, on the whole, like kind of as like a street art type thing. So there are ones that were definitely kind of like snuck in there that were like super intentional. Other ones kind of just made their way in there just because that happened to be, the photo reference that I took. So
it's very Dada. If I sort of take the woman's figure out of the image for a moment, it becomes very Dada.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Well,
yeah, there's a lot going on, and
yeah.
I mean, I have fun with them. They're fun to paint.
It's so layered. There's so much going on. You're helping me to understand or how that's happened for you. Let's go ahead and look at the next image. Okay.
Yeah, that's another studio painting. So for everybody that's kind of watching, I wanted to have some of my studio paintings, and then later we'll look at some of my plein air paintings, and you can kind of see how they may or may not relate to one another.
Well, I think that I will say right away before the whole audience sees it, that I think there's a lot of energy and a lot of depth in your paintings. Doesn't matter what it is that what your subject is, but this is one that I should have asked it before. Do you use studio models? Do you take a photograph? Do you?
Well, I rely on, professional photographers. So a lot of the images that I use, I comb from stock photography websites and things that are open source. So that I can use them, however.
So you use them as a reference, and then you.
So I can use them as a reference. So oftentimes there are things about them that I'll change, sometimes, for example, I might, use like one of my hands for a reference, or, change the makeup, change the hair, or something like that. So yeah, no, I don't typically use my own models. I do also like to draw and paint from models, but not typically for these types of more composed pieces. Those are more just like, kind of studies and exercises and stuff like that to kind of keep it fresh.
So what's the title mean? Disco Kitten. I mean, that's kind of,
I think I liked the what's the word? The assonance of the eyes. So disco kitten.
It's not a political statement.
Not this one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's look at the next one. And is this a political statement?
Well, I mean, everything's political to a point, right?
No, but my real question is, are you intentionally making comments on contemporary society? That's my real question. It's not. Yeah. I'm not asking you if this is your politics and explain your politics or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, they obviously there's commentary on pop culture, consumerism, race, the environment, like yes. So I do consider those things when I'm composing my paintings, for sure. Absolutely. Mickey Mouse makes his way into a lot of them.
There was just a comment about the layering of your images. And I think you do this with your intense colors in a way that the art historian in me, as soon as I saw your work, it's like, okay, this is Jasper Johns, but his palette is somber and dark. And you seem to have, he was really more playful than people realize, but you can't walk up to a Jasper Johns and feel all playful and energetic. You might after a while if you know what his personal symbolism is, but your work really puts that out there, I think, in a very energetic way. I mean, if there's anything that I really like about your work and makes it distinctive, it's how energetic it is.
I mean, these three paintings, they were all painted around the same time. So they're all in a similar vein with like, similar ideas, speaking to like that kind of like that playfulness and that energy. Yeah, all of those things.
Good. Well, the next image, I think, is one of the ones that shows the shift. And you told me an interesting backstory of this one. So maybe you want to share it with the
Okay, yeah. So this is a painting of a mailbox that I did during Paint Annapolis last year. But I was waiting in between events so for it to get dark so I could start my nocturne. So this was a little jammer that I banged out. And I think it was actually raining. I think there was a downpour like when in the midst of trying to paint this.
Well, I'm glad you chose to paint a little corner, a little bit of Annapolis that's not the cliched thing that we so often see.
Sure, yeah.
And I was saying to you, and now that we're looking at the image, I like to walk around during Paint Annapolis and just look at the different artists and what they're doing, and maybe
that's part of the fun.
But I think I saw you doing this, and I was fascinated. So I'm glad we're having a chance to get to know each other a little bit, because I think that was a brilliant thing to do. Now I don't know if it shows up, Marissa. If you don't mind, I think there's two more images. Would you quickly show them and then go back to this one? Yeah, okay. Let's hold here for a minute. Beth-Ann, your work is very painterly. So much so that there's a lot of dynamism, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of visual interest just in your brushwork. Is there any particular artist that has inspired you, or who sort of gave you the path you wanted to follow in painting so energetically?
Yeah, well, actually, I mentioned two of them earlier that I had the pleasure of studying with at MICA. The first was Raoul Middleman, who he's a famous Baltimore-based painter. He passed away, I think it was 2 years ago now at this point. And then Karl Plansky, who was from Florida originally, but then moved to Brooklyn, New York. And I met him while I was studying at MICA. And Karl, for the oil painters out there, Karl founded Williamsburg Oil Paints. And he worked very closely with Joan Mitchell. And so you can kind of see that that's a little bit of my pedigree, like the painterliness. And I have a deep appreciation for the abstract expressionists, and that was what Karl's work was like as well. It was very, very, very expressive, and he was not shy with paints at all. And I think that his background and his love of color and being able to use the paint liberally really helped to instill that in me, so that I'm not shy about using paint. I love paint. I use it very liberally to really have a deep appreciation of the materials, of the pigments, of the earth, where the pigments are coming from, and Karl would share different books about like the origin of the origin and the history of different pigments, throughout history. And it's so fascinating, and it really does make a difference the materials that you use. And he gave me a deep appreciation for that.
Okay, Buffalo Eternal suggests immediately that there's something about a buffalo, a place. Am I?
Yes, good. That's a good good deduction. So this was painted during the Floyd plein air biennial in Floyd, Virginia last summer, last August. Was like, right a few weeks after Paint Annapolis went down there. So in the background, you'll see there's kind of like those mountains. The hump that's there is Buffalo Mountain.
Oh, okay.
And for a lot of the plein air events, just like Paint Annapolis, there's they'll give you kind of like little assignments for the
Yeah,
day. So
yeah.
this assignment was we had to paint the Buffalo Mountain.
Oh, okay.
I found that one of the best views was from the local cemetery.
Knowing that gives the painting, for me, a little different sort of understanding of the painting, but it doesn't change it or diminish it in any way. In fact, it's interesting to know that that was an assignment. Assignments don't always turn out that well when somebody's telling you what to go and paint, right?
Well, I always try to take them with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this one, your brushwork is much different in this painting, though, and I wonder if there was anything about the weather conditions that day or anything like that, because what I mean is they're much smaller and
Yeah. So I was working with acrylic for this piece, and it was rather sunny and warm out that day, so the paint was drying very fast.
okay. But it has the kind of structure of the visibly loose brush strokes that Cezanne interjected in, but it doesn't have that sense of, he had that theory about color and how he put down the brush strokes. You're more spontaneous, but it does have that sense of you are in control of every one of these little brush strokes. So anyway, it's a very fine landscape.
Thank you.
Next image, which I think is our last. Okay, yeah. But as a bartender, does that make you, in any way, does that affect your painting?
I think that in a lot of ways they're not dissimilar. I think that it does really take a certain amount of finesse to be able to chat with folks from all different walks of life, especially when you're doing plein air, because everybody can and will come up to chat with you while you're painting and tell you about their nephew that paints. They'll ask you, how long does that take? It's like they'll ask you the same thing every time without fail. And bartending's like that in a lot of ways too. You have your same customers that they come in, and it's a little bit like Groundhog's Day sometimes. You have the same conversations with the same people, and while you're doing something else. So whether that is composing a painting or you're building some drinks. So they are kind of similar in that way. And a painting you're composing, it has to have a certain level of harmony and be pleasing, I think, to somebody eventually, I hope. In the same way that your drinks are, and sometimes you have some recipes, some formulas, and then other times you kind of do some experimentation, and sometimes it turns out delicious, and other times, you toss it down the sink.
Well, I don't know if you did this thinking that you were experimenting, but it's so atypical of what I would expect a Paint Annapolis painter to do. Because people are usually doing the boats in the water and maybe the historic buildings or something like that. But this is exactly, as you noted, the kind of thing that I would photograph. But it reminds me of the days when I would visit bars more often. And this is where I can imagine myself standing and smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, you go out, you have a cigarette,
show up.
You lean up against, against the pole, put a cigarette out on it,
Yeah,
somebody,
but not to leave on that note. I think it's absolutely stunning the way you use that intense reddish orange as the anchor, and then a little pool of yellow and of course, the yellow house across the street. And I know somewhere in Annapolis, there's a house that is that bright yellow.
When the sun hits it, maybe at
Yeah.
least. Yeah, that's right around the corner from so this we painted this, or I painted this during the Art on the Avenue event, which is like one of my favorite events of a Paint Annapolis, and one of my favorite places to stop, because I think it's hilarious, because my name is Beth-Ann. There is a little deli liquor
on
store
the
that's
corner.
called Ann Beth's.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I always just get such a kick out of Ann Beth's, because I'm
Yeah.
like, my name is Beth-Ann. And I think I tell the lady behind the counter that like every time I go in there.
This is, I think, a very coloristically vibrant painting in a subject that, just on its own, a lot of people would ignore. They wouldn't even look at it. It's part of that stuff that disappears because it's so familiar. And one of our board members just
Thank you.
commented that she purchased it. Well, good on
Clearly, you have impeccable taste.
Yes, she does. I think now it is time, though, for some. I see there are a couple of comments in the chat room, maybe, or questions that I haven't seen. And it's probably time to ask everybody if they have questions or comments they want to share.
Here's a question.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you ever use a palette knife for painting?
Yes, I do. I don't use palette knives exclusively. I like to incorporate them into, especially if I'm laying down like a large, like kind of swath of painting, to kind of just like, get the paint on there, especially because I feel like, with plein air painting in particular, you're kind of up against the clock,
Yeah.
because the light's changing, the birds are flying overhead, there's bugs around, you just want to like kind of like get it out there, like, as fast as you can, so like a lot of times I find that sometimes it's just easier to take and use a palette knife to get the paint off the palette onto the canvas, and then I like to push it around with a brush once it's on the canvas.
I was thinking that all along, and I couldn't see where I thought obviously you had used a palette knife, and that sort of gives me an understanding of how.
I like to kind of like play with different things and different different types of brushes. Of course everybody has like their workhorses, but I experiment from time to time with different things, or the other end of the brush.
Well, you take a lot of risks in your work, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
In lots of different ways.
I do. I like to experiment and play around and see what happens. I think that it's really easy to kind of get stuck in especially when you've been painting for such a long time. It's like it can become mechanical if you don't try to do things to like keep it fresh. People that have been painting a long time, it's like how to paint. So I like to kind of like push the boundaries and like take risks, use different things for references, experiment with like pushing colors a certain way.
So are there any other questions from the viewing, listening audience?
Oh, I have a question. I don't think we heard, what is the name of your gallery?
It's called Night Owl Gallery.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was trying to come up with a name, because a lot of galleries are named after the person that owns them, right? Or the director, right? So I was like, Wilson Gallery, that's kind of boring, like I don't have like a really cool name.
Well, it's definitely a cool name without, at least in my opinion, being cutesy. It's distinctive and different, and
I wanted to have it be something that would be something that was like memorable, something that was related to my life and my passion, and that I could merchandise.
So if there aren't any other questions or comments, I want to thank all of you for listening. Okay, well, it's been really great talking to you.
Thank you.
Your work is very dynamic, and so is your personality, and so it made it really easy for me tonight. I hope.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will.
And good luck in Paint Annapolis.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Have a good night,
everybody.
See you soon.